Hi, good afternoon once again, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of The Law and You. I'm your host, yours truly, attorney at law, Shelon Washington, owner and founder of the Washington Law Firm. We're located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. And if you're interested in any of what I'm discussing today or any of the past videos, just remember, you can always give us a call. The consultation is free, 15 minutes free consultation. The number is written on the screen, 718-877-3100. Today, we're going to be talking about spousal support or spousal maintenance. We're going to be discussing some of the factors the court will take into account and determining whether or not your spouse should be awarded maintenance either during a divorce or even pre-divorce. Just note, guys, that a spouse can ask the court for maintenance if the parties are separated, and or even if the parties are living in the same house, but one party is not contributing anything at all to the household. The spouse who is neglected or not receiving any support, that one could approach the court at any point and ask the court to order the non-compliant spouse to support them. So just bear that in mind whenever you think in terms of separation, divorce. Think in terms of whether or not you will be required to pay any support to that spouse. And a lot of people are misguided as to what the standard is. The standard is whether or not your spouse is or is sometime in the future capable of self-supporting themselves. So and part of it is maintaining the status quo. So if the parties are used to being enjoying a certain lifestyle and they're both used to pooling their resources together and enjoying a certain level of lifestyle, the court is going to want to maintain that lifestyle for the spouse who's being divorced or the spouse who's neglected. So in terms of you thinking about leaving your marital home, consider this: whether or not the court will require you to pay spousal support to your spouse. And there are numerous factors which the court takes into account, which we're going to be looking into. We're going to be discussing some of those factors that the court will ordinarily take into consideration when the court is trying to make a determination of whether or not your spouse is entitled to any form of support whatsoever. And there are cases where the spouse is not entitled because the spouse is self-supporting and the spouse is just going to be maintaining the same status quo that they had prior to the separation or the divorce. There are instances which I have seen personally where one spouse told the judge, and I've read the transcript. I wasn't involved in that case, guys, but I read the transcript. And I want people to recognize that sometimes the judges themselves are unaware of what they're doing, and they could make a big mess out of your life if they're not paying attention to what they're doing or they misuse the law. And there are a lot of judges out there who misuses the law. So you got to be vigilant and careful and watchful, and just note that an attorney if you find the wrong one, the attorney will always be watchful for your own interests and be able to save you. The attorney might be setting you up. So you have to ensure that you have the right attorney to represent your interests, who's paying attention to what is happening to you. I saw the transcript for one case, which the person came to me after the divorce. And when I read the transcript, guys, I was really appalled. The wife sat and testified and told the judge that the husband was not contributing to the household. He did not do anything. And the judge awarded her a substantial amount in the house and in the assets. But the judge did one thing wrong. The judge went ahead and awarded that spouse with support. In that case where a spouse is telling the court that she has done everything, she's been the one to pay the mortgage, she's been the one to upkeep the home, she's been the one to do all these things, it is wrong for a judge to then turn around and award that spouse with maintenance, because essentially that spouse was telling the judge that she was in fact self-supporting, because she was able to pull the weight of the family by herself, support the children, send them to school, put one of them through college, and do all these things on her own. And that spouse was working with the I think the state or the city of New York. And it's incredible that that judge, I don't know how to describe that judge, but incredibly, that judge awarded that woman with spousal support, even though she had a job, she was getting rental income from a property that she owned. All the factors were in her favor, that even if the judge wanted, he could have given her whatever amount he wanted in the property, in the assets. But where the judge erred, and I think somebody should have reversed the judge on this issue, is the support that he also awarded that spouse with. Unfortunately, that person came to me long after that case was already outside of the time to file an appeal. Guys, the time to file an appeal is 30 days after a notice of entry is entered on any judgment. So let's get into the factors that the court take into account in awarding you with spousal support. Now, the first thing you need to know is, let's look at the domestic relations law in the state of New York. Guys, we're specifically focusing right now on the state of New York. And you look at the factors on the DRL 236, section B, and you look at it, part B, and you see where the court said the term maintenance shall, and it means providing for, in a valid agreement. It could be an agreement or in an award by the court in accordance with the provisions of the subdivision 5 and 6 of that part, to be paid at a fixed interval for a definite or indefinite period of time. But an award for maintenance shall terminate upon the death, blah, blah, blah. The court give you instances upon which it could be terminated. But what I want you to focus on at this point is the fact that maintenance in the state of New York could be for an indefinite period. And in order to determine what that indefinite period is, you got to first understand why the court would even go to that extreme length to award anybody with indefinite maintenance. And there are a plethora of factors. There's 15 factors for post-divorce maintenance pursuant to DRL 236B 6E1. Now, the first thing the court is going to look at is the age and the health of the parties. Now, obviously, if one spouse is sick and advanced in age, chances are the court is going to want to take that into account in offering an award to a spouse. If a man or a woman chooses to marry a person who then become ill, very, very ill, and unable to work, then you're responsible. The law says you'll be responsible for that person. But we're going to get to the duration of that responsibility. The next thing is the present and the future earning capacity of the parties, including history of limited participation in the workforce. You know, I see a case where a man went to his home country. He's not from the United States, but he lives here. He went to his home country and he married the wife, and he brought the wife to the United States. From the time he brought her to the United States to the time he filed for the divorce, the woman had never, ever worked, period, in the marriage. And she had no marketable skills that she could go out in the workforce and find a job and say, okay, I'll just work and take care of the family. She had none of that. So the court is going to take into account the earning capacity. Now, what earning capacity can a woman have who has never worked in her entire life, has no skills, has no high school diploma, has no college degree or anything of the sort? Chances are that man is stuck for life taking care of that woman. The next factor is the need for one party to incur educational educational training expenses. So during the separation, the court take into account whether, if the parties are relatively young, maybe the wife or the husband, whoever was not working, might want to go back and get some training in school. But that is subject to the fact that the spouse must be able to be literate the least and have a high school diploma or something that they can actually go to school. I've seen one person married, brought a woman from Guyana and married her, and she was illiterate. So in that case, chances are, if that man chooses to divorce, again, he might be stuck, because what are the chances a woman in the 40s are going to be able to go back to school and get a college degree and learn? Well, first of all, she has to learn to read and write. That's the first thing, because she's illiterate. So what are the chances? And your illiterate spouse will be able to go back to school in the 40s and be able to obtain a degree. These are things people must take into account when you're trying to divorce somebody from out of your life, and you thought it was a great idea in the beginning to marry a man or woman who couldn't even support themselves. They were not working. They never earned an income. They never did anything. And I saw one instance where a lady is ranting on the internet about her soon to be ex-husband wants to be supported. He wants her assets. He wants this. And I'm sitting there and she's saying he never supported the children. He never contributed anything. He doesn't work. He's unemployed. And I'm like, these are the textbook factors for the court to actually award maintenance to the spouse who is incapable of becoming self-supportive. So you've got to be careful, people, when you make a choice as to who you're going to get into a relationship with, somebody who you intend to marry some way down the road. I tell people all the time, ensure that that person is the least bit self-supporting. One of the other factors is whether or not there's child support, and whether or not that child support will be terminated before the maintenance or after. Because if a spouse is receiving child support in addition to spousal support, obviously it's going to go a long way to making the amount of money they're receiving increase by somewhat, to some degree. So the court takes that into account when the calculation for maintenance was based upon child support being awarded, with the results in the maintenance award lower than it would have been had child support not been awarded. So the court will take that factor into account. Another thing is wasteful dissipation of marital property, including transfer encumbrance made in contemplation of a maintenance action without fair consideration. A lot of people think, okay, I don't want to support this person. I just want to get out to this marriage. So what they do, they transfer out their assets, get rid of the money, and they believe it's not traceable. But I want you to know that asset is traceable. That money is traceable. As long as you put it into a bank account, it is traceable. And I do know that there are instances where men in particularly work off the books, and they take that money and they hide it. I know a situation where the husband was doing what is called, he was working as a security guard or a bouncer, and he was trying to hide that fact from the court. But the court can impute income into anybody that they're trying to impose maintenance award on. So if you need to be paying your spouse maintenance and you're trying to deceive the court could easily impute, if they don't find you to be a credible witness, they can impute income to you based on testimony of your spouse that you actually do work on the side or off the table. This has happened several times. I've seen this also happen in divorce cases where one party didn't want to pay to, they wanted to hide their income, so they believed that they were going to get more money from the other partner in terms of either child and spousal support. But that doesn't work with the court. The court judges, a lot of judges, even though there's some ones that makes terrible blunders, like the one that I was telling you, that listened to the woman sit on the witness stand and testify that as to how she was basically self-supporting and still award her maintenance. That's incredible. That judge need to be pulled out, and maybe that judge should consider retirement from the bench. When you're making obvious mistakes, errors of that sort that affects people's lives, yeah, you need to be removed ASAP from the bench. Next, let's move to the other factors. As I said, the existence and the duration of premarital, joint household, or pre-divorce separation separation household. This is the fact that, the way the parties maintain their household prior to the separation and after the separation, the household might decrease, it might diminish. So, for instance, when the husband was in the household, they probably were spending more money on utilities and food. Once he's gone, all your expenses are supposed to be reduced because he's no longer there. He's no longer taking space up in the apartment, and then he's going to have to maintain his own household, or she. So the court has to take into account the cost of how much it's going to cost that spouse to maintain themselves versus when the parties were together. Okay. um, Another factor is act by one party against the other that have inhibited or contributed or continue to inhibit a party's earning capacity. So there are instances like where one spouse is going to tell the others, you can stay home and I will work. That's something you're doing to inhibit your spouse's earning capacity. A lot of times men tell women to retire or listen, you stay home and I'll take care of you. And I think that's one of the worst mistake anyone can make in a marriage, by telling your spouse to stay home, not to work, and that you will work and maintain the household. If you decide to do that, just know chances are, if that turns out to be a long-term marriage, you'll be supporting that person for the rest of your miserable life or the rest of their miserable life. So a man or a woman must always take into account when you're thinking about allowing your spouse to be a homemaker. No, that's never a great idea, because you might be stuck for a very long time, depending on the duration of the marriage, taking care of that spouse for the rest of either your life or the rest of their life. So I think people need to think very carefully when you're making these decisions, because all these factors can affect you if you decide that you want to divorce. And this, we can't run away from reality. A lot of men often, after a while, they get tired and they want to go explore. The grass always looks greener on the other side. And that's not to exonerate you ladies. Also, women at a lot of times think the grass is green on the other side of the pasture also. And people often want to explore until they discover that it's not true. The grass is the same wherever you go. It's the same. So a lot of times it's better to make sure you fortify yourself either before you get into these marriages, or if you do get into it, you better try to work your situation out and stay where you at. You're going to end up being running out there. You're going to end up being the loser, because these are factors you did not take into account when you decided that you wanted out of your marriage. All right, let's continue with some of the other factors the court take into consideration. The court to take into consideration the availability and the cost of medical insurance for the parties. So most likely the spouse who was never working would have been on the spouse who is working health insurance. And the court's going to take into account that your spouse, once you're divorced, your spouse is going to need to afford health insurance on his or her own. So you might be thinking, okay, I'm entitled to this and I'm entitled to, but who is going to pay for your spouse's health insurance? You were paying it the whole time, right? So chances are the court is going to either make you put sufficient money for that spouse to afford health insurance on their own now. That's going to be considered in the maintenance award. Another factor is care of the children or stepchildren, disabled children or stepchildren, elderly parents or in-laws provided during the marriage. That infants, but during the marriage, if these things, if there was children, if there was disabled parent, and that inhibited your spouse working or earning capacity, the court takes into account that. So for instance, a lot of people have children and one spouse might be able to do a lot of overtime while the other spouse has to stay home or get there early and not do overtime to take care of the children. That's something the court takes into account, because the spouse who's doing the overtime would have put the responsibility on the spouse who had to stay home or get home early to take care of the children, and that would have reduced or diminished or inhibit your spouse's earning capacity. All right. So tax consequences to each party. The courts take into account tax consequences, the standard of living the parties established during the marriage. And this is a big one. Whatever the standard of living is or was that the parties enjoyed during the marriage, the court often look at that and make a determination based on, let's say you were going on 10 vacations a year. You were enjoying a lavish lifestyle. you were eating organic food all year round. These are things the court's going to take into account in giving your spouse an award. The spouse must be maintained at a similar or close to the lifestyle they were enjoying during the marriage. Don't believe that it's just easy to just dump the spouse and keep it moving. It doesn't work that way. People need to get this right, so that in the United States, it's not that easy. It's a little bit easier in Guyana. You could literally just dump a spouse and keep going, keep it moving in Guyana. When it comes to the assets, even though there's a presumption that the asset is marital asset, you could find a way to overcome it much easier in Guyana than you can in the United States. The laws are much tougher. They do not want your spouse to become a ward of the state. The state does not want to be responsible for maintaining your spouse while you run along and enjoy your life into the sunshine with somebody else. The court says, no, you're going to be responsible for that disabled spouse. You're going to be responsible for that spouse who can't support themselves. And I see a lot of podcasts these days with a lot of ignorant people spreading misinformation and telling people that it's a man's responsibility to take care of a house and that the man should work and provide for the household. And there are a lot of ignorant followers who are following this theory. People are just uneducated, they're misinformed, misguided. So people believe, I agree, like to some extent, the Bible tells people who are religious that, the man's responsibility is to his wife and he's supposed to take care of the house and he's the head of the house. But guys, try being the head of your house in the United States. You will quickly learn that if that marriage doesn't work out, you will be stuck to take care of that woman, maybe for the rest of her life, depending on the length of the marriage. So for those people, unfortunately, who pays attention to podcasts, pays attention to all of this stuff that they see on the internet, and they're buying into it, thinking it's okay to take an uneducated woman or a woman who's incapable of becoming self-supported, you better make sure that you will never get bored of that marriage and you will want to be there for the rest of your life. Because if you do change your mind, you are going to be taking on a huge responsibility for the rest of your life or the rest of that woman's life. Because in New York, there is unlimited, there's maintenance without, it's called indefinite maintenance. So if you want to be stuck with indefinite maintenance as a man or a woman, then I encourage you to take somebody who you want to support for the rest of your or their life. But if you don't want that, and you want that if you choose to walk away from a relationship, that both parties could be self-supported, then look for your equal. Don't take somebody who is a burden to you, or don't do that. Just take your equal and it will be well with the both of you. Neither party would have to be worried about spousal support or maintenance. And just note, like I said, the court they're working for the state. The court is not working for us. So people need to understand this thing also. The court is not for your rights. The court's about protecting the state. So the state doesn't want another responsibility of taking care of your spouse. So as much as the state could avoid that responsibility, the state's going to put it on you and tell you, you're responsible for taking care of that deadbeat spouse. You're responsible for carrying the weight on your shoulders, maybe till you retire or till when whatever happens. There is a point when you're going to be relieved from that responsibility if you're saddled with indefinite maintenance. That's when you retire. Whenever you yourself retire, the court is most likely to relieve you of that responsibility of having to support. And remember, guys, the bottom line is whether or not that spouse will be able to support themselves, whether or not they will become self-supporting, whether or not they will not be a ward of the state or become a liability of the state. The other factor that the court will take into consideration, the reduce or loss of earning capacity of the payee as a result of having to forego or delay education, training, or employment career opportunities during the marriage. And like I said, I mentioned this earlier, this often happens where, these misogynistic men, they take these women and they think the job as a woman is to stay home, to cook, to clean, and to take care of the children. Obviously, if you believe that to be truthful, then obviously the woman is going to have to delay her education. She's going to have to delay training, delay employment. And while she's doing that, she is accumulating her income off of you, because you already know what happens if you choose to divorce. A big chunk of your income is going to go to her. And we're going to discuss the calculations and how the court calculate the statutory portion of your income that has to go towards your spouse. So if you choose that, and I'm not knocking anyone or telling anyone how to live their life. Some men obviously feel it's best to have a woman who stays at home. But I'm telling you that if that's your choice, you're in the wrong country. You do not belong in the state of New York. You do not belong, because in most part of the United States, that's what's going to happen. The state does not want the person to become a ward of the state. They do not want to take on a liability. So that liability will be your weight to carry as long as the maintenance continues, as long as the support order continues. All right. So another factor the court takes into consideration is the equitable distribution of marital property and the income or imputed income on the assets so distributed. So, for instance, if the court awarded the entire marital home to the spouse who's supposed to receive the maintenance, obviously, let's say it's a multi-family home, that home is going to be bringing in a income. So the court's going to take into account the income, the rental income coming in from that property. And if the court believed that the rental income could increase, the court could impute income on that asset and say, well, okay, you're going to be getting an extra $2,000 from this asset. So we only have to give you $1,000 in maintenance a month from your spouse. So that's what the court means when it's going to take into account the equitable distribution of marital property and whether or not the court income coming in from that property, or whether or not the court has to impute any income to that property. The other factor is the contribution and services of the payee as a spouse, parent, wage earner, and homemaker, and to the career or career potential of the other party. Okay, so the party who is contributing, the court is not just going to impose a big liability on them just like that, because there are instances where a party, a man or a woman, might tell the spouse, you can stay home and I will work. But when the spouse who's working comes home, the dishes are not done, the house is not clean, the children are not fed, and the spouse who's working still have to come home, clean the house, ensure that the children's homework is done, and ensure that they're fed. Now, the court's going to take that into consideration. So the payee spouse, they might be thinking, okay, I'm entitled, but the court will say, no, you did not contribute a whole lot towards your family. You did not make sure that the children were taken care of. Your spouse still had to come home, or the spouse still had to pay somebody to come in and keep the home, clean the home, and to be a maid or provide maid services. So we're going to take that into consideration and probably reduce the amount of support you're entitled to. And then finally, the 15th factor is the courts would basically take any other factor that they believe could influence the maintenance. So although inheritance is not a part of maintenance, inheritance plays a role. So if a party inherited assets from somewhere, they inherited the assets from, let's say, their parent died and left them asset, obviously that's going to help you to become more and more self-supporting. So that is a factor, that is something that must be considered, whether or not the spouse is capable or somewhat able, with whatever money they have coming from wherever, to stand on their own 2 feet with little or no help from the spouse who has to pay the support order. So, guys, there's a number of things I always encourage people to make sure either you do before. If you don't do it before, look out for yourself and ensure that at some point you take care of it, you ensure that it is done, so that you will not be left out in the cold, or you would not be placed in a position where you have to be supporting a spouse that you just want to cut ties with and move on with your life. Very often after divorce, if the case is somebody left because of infidelity, people often, the unfaithful spouse often wants to go. They don't want to be tied to the other spouse. They just want their life and move on. I've had so many situations where the husband left because he found a new woman, and all he wants to do is to sever his ties with his ex-wife, well, soon to be ex-wife, and go so that he can enjoy life. There's a situation where I've had it the other way, where the wife was the one who found somebody she thought she found the love of her life, or whatever the case may be, and she wanted to sever. She just wanted a divorce so she can move on and enjoy her life with the new partner that she had found. So, guys, just think about these maintenance guidelines whenever you're thinking, okay, you want to run off into the sunshine with the love of your life, or you just want to get out of a bad marriage. Think about those factors before you abandon your marital home and move on. So think about those factors very carefully, even before you get married. Think about those factors very carefully, because New York is not the state for you to be supporting any spouse and then going to try to divorce. You're going to be stuck. I'm warning you up front. You're going to be stuck. So be careful. Think about these factors. And thank you once again for joining me this afternoon. This is Attorney at Law Shelon Washington, proudly brought to you today, the law. And if you have listened to this program or any of my other programs and you're interested in legal advice, again, please ensure that you call the number 718-877-3100. And I said before, consultation is free, 15 minutes of free consultation, guys. If you got any legal issues that you need to discuss, give me a call, 718-877-3100. The office is at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. Again, guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you again next week at 4 p.m. sharp for the law and you. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.